Yeah, well, that's the trouble, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got to keep me on track.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the Wildlife Trust Nature Farming with Nature tent. I'm Vicki Hurd, and I will be hosting this session on Lowland peat, solutions rethinking farming on Lowland peat. And we are recording this, so welcome to all the people online who will be seeing this. And I hope we can delve into, we've got a short amount of time, but we can delve into some of the issues, the challenges with farming on Lowland peat, because it's a fantastic soil to grow crops in, and grassland. Some is used for grassland. Some is extracted for peat for use as a substrate, and yet it's an incredibly important resource. It's an incredibly important source of carbon, because the carbon is locked into Lowland peat. If it's treated, if it's worked well, it's locked in and saving a lot of emissions if it's managed well. If it's not, you get a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So 2.2% of agricultural land is peat, Lowland peat, but it represents 29% of our agricultural emissions. So it's a huge source at the moment. So that's why we're thinking of how it can be changed, how we farm on that land, and in some cases not farming on that land, and in order to stop those carbon emissions, but also restore it for nature, because it's a very nature-rich area with some really unique habitats and species that we want to recover, restore and recover, which is really important if we're going to achieve our target of 30 by 30, 30% of nature, inland waterways and marine restored for nature by 2030, which is a binding target that we have. So we've got a real interest in this, and we've done a discussion document, which you can get on our website, Agricultural and Lowland Peatlands, where we look at some of the many issues, and you can learn more if you want to learn more. But we have some fabulous speakers talking about their experiences of farming on Lowland peat and projects in a process called polyculture, which I'm sure you've heard. It's another phrase is wetter farming, where you re-wet the peatland soils so they stop emitting carbon emissions and start recovering as a nature resource. But you can still do some farming. So we're going to learn about that today with some fabulous speakers. I'm going to have to take a drink. I get very dry mouth, I'm afraid, when I'm speaking. But we're going to hear from Phil Jarvis, who's a farmer with many, many hats in the past. I'll let them introduce what they've been doing, but I'll just go through the panel. We've got Sarah Jane Taylor, who's a farmer in the Cambridgeshire Fens, which is obviously a very rich peatland area. Sarah Johnson, who's head of peatland nature recovery in the Wildlife Trust of Lancashire, Manchester and North Merseyside, so it's a long one. And Cameron Edwards, who's a farmer in Goose Meadow Farming up in Lancashire. So two very important areas for Lowland peat. We will hear from them. And then there will be opportunity for you to ask questions afterwards. So please do think of any you might have, and we'll get onto that as soon as we can. So they're going to speak 5 to 7 minutes max, which isn't enough, I'm sure, but I'm sure you'll understand. And maybe there'll be time afterwards to chat further after we close the session. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming. And I'll start with Phil. Please introduce your work on Lowland peat and your experiences and challenges and messages to government.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Vicki. So I'm going to talk to you about some projects in Norfolk and in Yorkshire that I'm involved with. And they will run to several hundred acres of peat in both of those places. But the first thing I want to do is I want to acknowledge some of my former colleagues, Sarah Aitken, Mike Edwards and Andy Miller, who put together projects, and much of this is about teamwork and the stakeholders you work together. It's not just one person who says, I'm going to save peat. So firstly, I was involved strategically. Now I'm involved more practically. The experiences and challenges, well, they range from flood to drought. In there somewhere, before I forget, there's food and farming, okay, and can you combine the two? Planning permissions when you're using public money. Also flood risk assessments and permits. and making sure that, and I might come back to how we get permits in the future, but it seems to me we need to be a bit more joined up between stakeholders about especially water abstraction and water availability. And any of you who were listening to Tom Bradshaw earlier on, that was the point about, when there's a lot of water around, why are we pumping it into the North Sea when a lot of our wetting up land is available? And in any of these projects, lots of surveys, lots of administration, lots of bureaucracies. So the partners that we're working with and the grants we're working with, mainly landscape recovery. We're in 4 landscape recoveries, 2 of them particularly for peat. We're working with a Fen East Peat Partnership, which is working very closely with Lancashire Wildlife Trust. And actually, the benefits of working with people like the RSPB as well is that the administration and bureaucracy, when you've got people from those organisations, they do help ease the pain a little bit of bureaucracy. Being able to deal with that administration, have backup and resources. So that's really quite important. We also work with Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. We work with Natural England. We work with the Forestry Commission as well. And the mechanisms we're using. So I've already talked about a Fen East Peat Partnership, landscape recovery, BNG. Is it a market? Is there that private finance? How much do you have to invest before potentially you see the return from actually? We can go through the process from monitoring and management. We can go through conservation covenants, Section 106. We can get it registered on a register. However, and people can do all the metrics to say how much uplift they are. You've then got to sell it. Okay, and I think a lot of people who are in that marketplace, it's the phase we've got to now where I'm interested in the brokers who are going to sell it with me rather than people and tell me how much I've got and how much I can uplift. So we're now getting to the phase where I'm looking at the financial side of this. Corporate social responsibility, environmental and social governance are all areas that might attract funding here. But once again, that's private finance. And of course, the other thing is countryside stewardship. And I think countryside stewardship has a lot of attractive things about it. You are much more control of your own destiny rather than some of these landscape recoveries where I think the processes by which you get to receive funding on your land can be quite complex. So messages to government. The first thing, there's 2 things here for me. All of this that we're talking about, whether it be peat or any other landscape recovery, this is about biodiversity or climate. It's secondly, for me, about making sure this is sustainable financially, because what it isn't about is about a project which gets bigger than those things altogether. So when we're doing these things, these landscape recoveries, these grants are all about a vehicle that gets us in a streamlined way to a lot of good biodiversity, climate change, net zero, but also makes it sustainable in the long term for landowners who are committing their land for a long time. Some of these projects can be, if it's nutrient neutrality, 90 years, or 30 years for conservation covenants and Section 106. And it has to be streamlined, and you have to think about the financial implications. So, Vicki, I think I'll stop there, but I would like to send that message out to government in future schemes. Payments up front as well, rather than expecting landowners to fund it and then claim in arrears. There's some big cash flow issues there as well.
Yeah, well, maybe we can cover that in the questions more as well. Thank you. So Sarah Jane Taylor from Oxwillow in the Cambridgeshire Fens. Similar area that you've been working, or that you're doing Yorkshire, but really interested in your experience of working with Lowland.
Yeah, so I work on a landscape recovery project alongside Phil. We're all in it together. I very much echo everything Phil has said. Yeah, we talk about it almost daily at the moment as we're trying to take the project forward. Also involved in biodiversity net gain. We have our own habitat bank on the farm that we set up quite early on. And again, it's a really difficult space to try and navigate at the moment with so much uncertainty from the government and the markets. other things that I'll probably focus on, because Phil's made so many brilliant points, is our paludiculture trials in collaboration with UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. That's a way that we're really trying to work out, the future of lowland farming on peat and how we can learn to do things differently or more sustainably. We do also have what we call sustainable farming trials on peat alongside the paludiculture, where we are sort of comparing how the crops act on sort of business as usual peat versus wet peat. So, for example, things like miscanthus. I can't say too much about what we're growing at the moment. There's going to be a big press release coming in the next few weeks, which we're really excited for. So look out for that on Oxwillow's social media and also UKCH's. But it's been a really great journey so far with the paludiculture trials. We've managed to prove that a plastic liner can work as long as you get it into the right sort of clay. We trialled 3 different sites across the farm before we found the right one, so geology is so important. Also water availability is fairly obvious. We're lucky where we are that we are next to a tidal river that has a lot of water that we can let into the system. But saying that, this week we're almost on a complete ban for irrigation and abstraction, so that was a really good start to an early trial. But so far it's coping okay, and hopefully the weather will behave. But again, I just need to echo everything that Phil has said, and probably add to the government that we really need some more research and development in the sector on lowland peat, more education, and just more support to keep going with it and keep learning what is the right way to go, so that we can continue working with food, farming, biodiversity, emissions, just everything, and try and make it all work together. And some joined up thinking would really be great.
Is the picture that you've given us on the screen one of your trials?
Yep, so the top picture across there, that's one of our biodiversity net gain sites. That's on our skirt land, so it is a little bit peaty down the bottom, but it's not a full representation of sort of lowland peat. But that's other neutral grassland on there, and there are some wet areas at the bottom. And then in the bottom right, you've got the paludiculture trials. So on the bright green strip there, that's where the plastic liner is. And you can just see the really ochre coloured dike, which is actually, I'm happy to say, now gone completely crystal clear. That was sort of an early picture of when we first re-wetted it, and you get a lot of leaching out of the land at first, but that has now gone clear. So there's miscanthus growing in there. And then the bottom left, that's some of our sustainable farming trials, where we're sort of growing some different mixes for wildlife on peat, and that's been a real joy to have alongside arable farming, because it's just absolutely humming with wildlife.
What wildlife are you seeing? Just so interesting.
Just about every kind of pollinator. I mean, excellent. I'm not really up on all of them, but just bees, butterflies, birds, hares running around. It's been really lovely. You can see it's been a safe haven in quite plain landscape at the moment, where everything just flocks to when it needs to hide. So it's been a real joy to do.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sarah. From Headland Peatland Nature Recovery at the Wildlife Trust, Lancashire, Manchester and North Merseyside. You've done a lot of work in this area and paludiculture trials. I'm interested to hear about how they're going.
Yes, so obviously, we work in the northwest of England, and in our area, we've got some of the largest remaining extents of lowland peatland soils. And the vast majority of those peat soils, as elsewhere in the UK, have been drained and converted largely for agriculture. And I guess in recognition that, that these areas will continue to be strategically important for the regional economy, so there isn't the option to take most of those areas out of agriculture. But at the same time, as we've seen, elsewhere as well, we're looking at sort of the climate changes, longer drought periods, and then intense rainfall periods, and everyone is seeing sort of issues with soil degradation and loss of oxidising of those peat soils in dry areas. So I think talking with farmers that we're engaged with, there's a recognition that in some areas there's only a significant amount of peat that's going to be left for the next 50 years or so. So we need to think of how we can do things differently, and the challenge and opportunity has been to try and find solutions that will still balance the needs of the environment and the climate, but also the needs of the people who are living and working in those areas. So Lancashire Wildlife Trust, we kind of started out, I guess, we've been working on peat soils for over 3 decades, and that used to be on the restoration of those core conservation areas. But looking in the landscape, we realised that looking and work at those agricultural peat areas and working with those who are living and working there is the best way forward. And if we want to try and make that our big gains we want to see for the climate and the environment. So I've been working with partners such as Cam and his mum Lisa here and others in the farmers, trying to find ways forward that will work for everyone. So we kind of embarked on our first wetter farming trial back in 2020. Lancashire Wildlife Trust has what we call our flagship nature reserve in North Lancashire with Marley Moss, and we managed to acquire some peat soils directly adjacent to the SSI. So we wanted to explore what could be done differently on what these more marginal, more difficult to manage land. The reason the person sold it to us because it was underwater for several months of the year. So that was where we set up our Winmarley carbon farm. So we essentially raised the water table and planted a permanent cover crop of sphagnum moss. So the product, if you like, of that was the carbon that would be protected in the peat soils and in much longer term sequestered. And so we were looking at how it could be done, how we could raise the water table and not flood the neighbouring land, which is a key concern of anyone who's looking at this from a farming point of view, and what would be the carbon savings from doing that. And we've seen really positive results in terms of massive reduction in carbon emissions from the carbon farm compared to the sort of surrounding land. So that's been really positive, and that's been going since 2020, 2021. And we've got a quite really great sort of carpet of the sphagnum mosses, and it's more or less sort of managing itself. We have to do some sort of still weed management, but it's looking pretty good. And we've seen, as you've mentioned, wildlife moving across without us bringing it in, because we're not harvesting it. We don't need it to be a pure crop. So we're seeing bog plants coming through and other wildlife moving in to use that area. So that's really positive. But that was our first trial, and we we're very keen to bring farmers onto the site to ask them, what do you think about what we're doing? What would you do differently? What are the questions that it raises? And so one of them was like, how do we make sure we don't flood neighbouring land? But also, what about food security? This is great that you're doing this, but we can't take all the areas that we're growing food out to do this kind of alternative thing. So we thought, okay, let's look at that question. What can be grown? What food crops can we grow? So we managed to buy some other peat soils in Greater Manchester. It'd been used for growing potatoes and other crops, but again, it became increasingly difficult for the farmer to manage, and that's why they were selling it. So we wanted to look at growing conventional food crops, to try and look at the questions of what crops can be grown, how high can we raise the water table and still get a crop, and what does that do for carbon emissions. So we first set out, at the moment we've got blueberries, which we'll be cropping this year. We've tried celery and lettuce to varying degrees of success. And we're also, this year, we have Chinese leaf and radishes, which are doing well. And we're hoping to harvest in the next few weeks. So we don't want to look at niche crops. We're trying to look at the crops that are grown already in the region, to not put in too many new variables, to just see what works and what doesn't. And trying to get the data around carbon emissions and yields that can be fed into policy as well, so we can try and develop the policy and the funding mechanisms that will support a scaling up. So that's ongoing, and more recently we've been working with Cameron and another farmer looking at bulrush typher. So again, another kind of wetter farming crop. Obviously not a food crop, although I think there are potentially food things you can do with typher, but we're working with a company called Ponder, who some people might have heard of, who are looking at plant-based textiles, so insulation for puffer jackets, so obviously like a potentially high-end market, and the seed heads from the bulrush are harvested and created into this plant-based textile, and they've got links with the fashion industry. So really try and looking at the business models that can support different types of wetter farming. And so we had one trial which set up through the Polyculture Exploration Fund in Greater Manchester, and we're hoping to harvest this year. And that's again, it's the learnings about how do you do the setup, how do you control the water table and stabilise the water table? What do you do when you've got prolonged dry periods or intense rainfall? How do you manage that? And all the questions around it. So we're trying to get a lot of environmental data to back up what is happening, again, to feed into policy and funding mechanisms for the future. And then through the Lowland Agricultural Peat Water Discovery Pilot, not a good catchy name, we've got our second type of trial working with Cameron and his mother, looking at that. And the key thing for these last two trials, we're wildlife trusts, we are not farmers. So we're very keen to go on a learning journey together. And so Cameron has been, he has done the groundworks and worked with us on the design. Cameron is managing the site and will be, the harvesting side of things. We've got a scrap peat challenge ongoing, which Cameron will talk about, looking at how do you mechanise the process of harvesting the crop. Because that's one of the biggest challenges, been not so much raising the water table, but keeping the water table where you want it, but also how do you get on to harvest these wetter areas? So be it like how you set up the land so you've got areas to get the machinery on, or do you have to think of things slightly differently? So we've used a drone to seed, do the sowing. And so it's looking at the technological answers as well as getting the data to show what is happening below the surface as well as on top, and feed that into the policy that we need to support it. If we want this to scale up, there has to be the policy and funding mechanisms, because no business is going to go into something that is a big unknown. So we need to demonstrate the business viability of it.
So you're actually doing drone seeding?
Yeah. So we did that on both our both the PEF site and the Lapwood site. So these feels a bit like War of the Worlds. It's like a huge mega drone coming forwards. Like we looked at using clay pellets with the seeds encapsulated, as well as using this kind of gel, like Ghostbuster type approach.
And it minimises the disturbance of a habitat.
Absolutely, yeah. So if we can minimise the disturbance of the peat soils, that's why also in terms of where we're doing our food crop growing, we're looking at. I think the way forward might be more towards perennial rather than annual crops, so you're minimising the soil disturbance. So it's all those kind of questions we need to keep thinking about and working with the farmers, because, as I say, we're wildlife trusts, we're not farmers, and we need to learn as much from those who have been managing the land for decades and decades before us.
Could I just come in there, because we'll be seeding 250 acres in Norfolk with a drone.
Excellent.
Probably
amazing,
the same drone.
It's huge,
50 kilo payload.
Great.
Probably 10 hectares a go if we get the seed rate right. We might be using a wooden kitty litter with it to make it distribute it. So, drone technology.
And this is funded by the DEFRA fund.
So our TIFA trials, one was both for the Nature for Climate pot, I suppose. So one was the first was with the Pluviculture Exploration Fund, and the second one with what we call the Lapwood, the Lowland Agricultural Peat Water Discovery Pilot.
Is that the Lapwing fund?
Well,
now,
that's what I call it in my head, because it's too long to say every time. But we're lucky to have both of those projects have just been extended for another year, so that's great.
I mean, it has to be said that DEFRA have put quite a lot into doing projects and things with the Lowland Task Force recommendations.
Yeah, I kind of feel that there used to be much more focus on, I guess, upland restoration. That is still very
still
important.
there, but they're now doing
I think it used to feel like lowlands were thought, it's too difficult, it's too challenging, we're just not even going to go there. But I think the penny has dropped on the carbon emissions that are coming from lowland peat, that we can't not look at that area. Yes, it is more challenging because of, we grow a lot of food crops there and other challenges, but that is where a lot of the solutions can be found if we work together with all those people who are working on that land.
Yeah, it's worth noting, I think 35% of our vegetables that we eat in the UK come from lowland peat. So there's a big challenge there, but you're really looking at options for that in a way. And that's,
I think we have to look at all options to see what works. And it's not going to be one thing that's going to be answered. It's going to be a mosaic of solutions, I think, and that's to be recognised both because regionally, east of England and the northwest, the rainfall differences are massive, and in the northwest at the moment we don't have internal drainage board, whereas obviously that is a situation elsewhere. So there's different challenges, but there are commonalities. So it's how do you look at managing that massive carbon source. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm intrigued to know what the food source from TIFA is, but let's see. I'll hear that later. Cameron, over to you now, and your experience of working on these lowland soils and new projects. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Cameron. We're farmers from southwest Lancashire. We're growing mainly combinable crops and potatoes. Most of the farm's on deep peat, some of it up to 4 metres deep. At least 100 acres of the farm is right in the middle of the bowl, which is really, really wet, and it's becoming really difficult to try farm, as we have done for the last 100 years. So we started looking at alternatives. So a project came up with the Wildlife Trust, with the Lowland Agriculture Peat Water Discovery Pilot, growing Typha. So we started a 6-hectare Typha trial, field scale. So we started it in August last year, and I did all the groundworks myself. So I went in with my digger and put a bund right round the exterior of the 6-hectare field. And the idea with that was to keep the water table in the field and not wet any of the surrounding fields, so we can still farm them as we were. So we did that. That all went well, no major disasters. We didn't get stuck, so that was good.
And you did the best bunding apparently than we've ever seen. So, yeah.
Wow. Great. Do you want to actually explain what a bund is? Because some people in the room might not.
Yeah, so we used a method called a deep trench bund, which is where you use the peat to make a watertight bund, and you go in and you kind of like invert it. Yeah. So you invert the peat sort of 1.5 meters down, and then as you do that, you then compact it again, and then when that re-wets, it swells and plugs any gaps. And it's quite impressive because it has worked.
Yeah.
You'll have it, really wet on one side, and you can drive with your tractor no trouble on the other. So that's worked quite well. So we did that, and then re-wet the field. So we just used our irrigation equipment and set to for about a week, re-wetting it, and that brought the water table up. Luckily, the field is situated right by a main sluice, which comes out of a water treatment works. So we have an endless supply of water.
And phosphorus.
Yeah, and nitrogen and phosphates and all that stuff that comes with it. So we've got an endless supply of water, so it's not been a problem this year, and we've had an 8-week drought, and that never ran dry. So we've managed to keep it wet. So we did that, and then we got a drone in to sow it in autumn. However, we think that was a bit too late for the Typha to want to germinate and grow, as it likes sunlight. So we were a bit too late in the season, so that was a bit unsuccessful. So we waited till April this year, and we sowed again, and that's been a lot more successful, but it's still been quite patchy. Because we're at a field scale, managing the water level is quite difficult because the field might look flat, but it isn't. It's and the peat swells. I think they found it swelled about 4.5 centimetres throughout the field. So some areas of the field are a lot deeper in water than others, and we found it's grown really well where the water wasn't that deep, where it was just boggy. So now we're just trying to get it to grow where the water was a bit deeper by managing the water levels a lot more, almost bringing the water level up to keep the higher bits wet, but then lowering it down for a week or two to try and germinate the lower areas of the field. So hopefully by this time next year we'll have a full coverage, or near enough full coverage. And we're hoping for a harvest next September. So in that time I'm also working on a harvesting machine. So we bought an old track dumper that had been converted to harvest apples out of Hereford. So that's had loads of extra hydraulics and all that kind of stuff fitted to it. So I've been busy in the workshop last winter converting it to have a conveyor belt system to fill potato boxes. And then this winter I'll be working on the cutter bar. So we're going to convert an old combine header to make a cut and collect system that will cut the seed head off and then collect it into a potato box at the back, and hope I don't get stuck.
Yeah, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, that's brilliant. And I should say, last year we did a session on wetter farming, and we had some Typhus and products from that in the room. So if you wanted to have a look at that session from last year as well as being in this one. You can see what it looks like, and it's a fantastic alternative to fossil fuel sourced microfibers for puffer jackets and all sorts. Really exciting and potential area. And we have a stall from BCN. What number is it, the stall? 25. Over there, you can have a look at some of those kind of projects and products. Really exciting to see from one of the other wildlife trusts over there. You won't be able to miss it, actually. You've got great signs over there. Big wildlife trust signs. Yeah, go that way. Anyway, we now have an opportunity for questions. I mean, there's lots of things. I did run a session on this at the Oxwillow Farming Conference, and the chair of the Lowland Peat Task Force, he gave a great speech, talked about what they'd found as a task force, and there's lots of issues, as we've heard here, and lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities. But he said at the end of his talk, it's all about water, water, water. You know, getting that right and understanding how we need to manage that water. And you talked about sort of really managing the water to get your harvest. So it's a fascinating area. And there will be grants available for farmers to do that wetting up to 30 centimetres and then up to the surface. So it's an exciting time to be talking about this. Anyway, enough from me. Questions, please. We have one in the order. Do we have mics? I should have checked. Are we going to... Brilliant. Mike over there. A lady over there with the grey top. And do put the mic nearer to your mouth. Thanks.
Hello.
Hi.
It's very interesting, and rewetting peatland, it is important for sequestering carbon. But I have a question regarding nutrients and pollution, because obviously this lowland peatland, when we were drained, they were also stocked with the fertilizer and amendments. And when you raise the water table, you have that legacy of nutrients that can be lost through diffuse pollution. And also because it's all about carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, you might have emission of greenhouse gases. And I was just wondering, how are you managing these risks? If you have a plan in place in terms of how do you strip the nutrients before wetting it, water table movement and
Thank you. And are you working in that area, or you're a farmer, or your research?
I am a catchment scientist. I am British Society of Soil Science.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your question. Would you like to answer that? Anybody?
Yeah, well, there's several ways. I mean, one of the ways, the fen is inherently fertile anyway, naturally, because of its organic matter. So, you know, growing a crop with no nutrients before you go into these is one way of stripping it out. The other way is actually converting them to something else. So, for example, keeping your ground covered, okay, and growing something out of it, and either converting it into maybe animal protein, so with some form of grazing. I think making sure that, and also you can mow and take away. So, and in these wetlands, in order to create something that's been farmed for probably hundreds of years, it's going to be a long-term plan. It may take 30 years to strip all these nutrients out, but having a plan to get there, you know, first with a crop, secondly with cover, bale it, or convert it into something else using animals. I mean, that's the point I did want to make in general as well, is that this is combining food and farming with environment. So I'm very keen on making sure that we get some form of produce off the land, because the environmental benefits of livestock on there, for whether it be making it an environment for insects and all the other things that thrive, or for wild birds and scrapes and stuff like that, they play a valuable part. But they also play a valuable part in our diet as well, and I think we should remember that. David, you'll agree with that. Excellent. He didn't pay me, David, then.
Can I just
Yes,
go on here? So we found that on our food crop trial in Rindle, in Greater Manchester, the first year we wanted to try and compare as much as possible with sort of business as usual, you know, how it would be on our site. But the first year, when we planted the celery, we didn't add any. We just, you know, we were looking at difference in the water table. We didn't want to add any extra nutrients, so we didn't. And we were told that when we planted celery, it would probably die within 6 weeks. It lasted and grew very well until at least 2 weeks before harvest, because of it, you know, the amount of nutrients that were still left in the system. So, although ultimately we weren't able to harvest the crop, so that wasn't great, but it was able to demonstrate that actually, growing crops to strip the nutrients before moving to the next stage is one way of looking at it. So that's why, and we are trying to monitor. We are monitoring what the impact is of raising the water table, and what's happening with, you know, the different nutrients and different things in the system, and the impact on sort of greenhouse gas emissions as well. So we're trying to gather that data in order to sort of feed into the next steps.
Did you actually harvest the celery so it wasn't then going back into the...
I think no, it wasn't halved. I think some of it was, and some we did try and take to market, but people were like, oh no, no. Yeah,
that is one problem with these systems. You might need customer education.
I think that it's partly about consumer what people think a product should look like, and what people are willing to accept, and also thinking, okay, if it's not right for supermarket shelves, is there something else the celery can be used for? But that's a different grade. So just trying to think about it differently.
Yeah. Sorry. Next question. Gentleman over there. Thank you. And then, sorry, I'll take your name. Sorry.
Thanks. Chris Evans, UKCH.
Hi.
It was a question about scalability. You mentioned scalability and how important that was, but then pretty much everything I think that's just been talked about is reliant on some form of DEFRA grant with a terrible acronym. What's the route to really being able to scale this? Because to scale it has to be commercial, and how far off are you from the point where any of this could be done without a DEFRA grant with a terrible acronym?
Yeah, good question. I mean, maybe it's early days yet because a lot of change recently. But does anybody want to?
I think that's really key. You're absolutely right. Like, we need to think about how to scale it up, and I think it's difficult to say whether it will ever be totally without sort of grants through countryside stewardship options. I know there's some more well-paying
public
options.
Goods grants for
but
public goods outcomes. Yeah?
I think that. I mean, I'm not a farmer, but I would imagine ultimately you want it to be another crop produce that is as profitable as what else is growing. I mean, maybe Cameron on the farmers and panel and talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just add to that. I think the benefit you've got with a lot of landscape recovery projects, you've got a lot of growers, so you have got scalability. I think the other thing you've got is got great provenance. So what might have started as an environmental project, whether it be for water vole or lapwing or something else, is a great marketing tool as well. So we're pump priming it, no pun intended for the water pumps anyway, but you've actually got the ability to use the skill set of farmers or associated people within those business to market your produce off that land, not just environmental goods, but food as well with local provenance. And that's, with the scalability, then you've got even more chance of getting into, local markets or even national markets.
Sarah Jane or Cameron, did you want to?
Yeah, I would probably add, we would like to scale this up as we've previously spoken about, but again, that involved a DEFRA grant for a start. I don't know from a re-wetting perspective if I ever see us being able to make enough money off of a paludiculture crop without receiving some kind of countryside stewardship or something, SFI grant, to pay for that re-wetting aspect. That remains to be seen, but yeah, there's definitely a willingness amongst farmers to scale up if it's possible. We've had conversations this week with some local ones that really surprised me, that I would never have expected to be interested in re-wetting, but they love the area they live in, they're passionate about it, they can see that change is coming, and they would rather consider re-wetting their land, to either for biodiversity or for a crop, than see the fens go to what is alternatives, which is possibly flooding. So, there's definitely a willingness there. I think again we need more research and development before we can get to that point.
Well, that's very positive to hear that. Cameron?
I think there is scalability. Certainly on our farm, we're 6 hectares already. We can prove that works. We easily go up to more acres. We've already got the drone sowing. I'm working on the harvester that can harvest them. Ponder seem to be making moves in the clothing world. So I think we have, especially for Typha, we have almost a whole product line, from start to finish, that could potentially be done without any funding. And then you get obviously the stuff on top from SFI and all that is a bonus, but in the long term, I can see it being just the same as a potato crop or anything like that.
And Ponder can use the marketing, as you described, to really sell it as an alternative to plastic and microplastic, creating clothes.
I think there is a point as well that we kind of touched upon it earlier about consumers, and I think. So talking to some of the other farmers we work with, like it might be the big supermarkets are putting pressure on them to be low carbon on their farms, but they're not getting the financial benefits of that. Absolutely. So if we want to see these products on the shelves, because we're talking a lot about polludiculture, but there isn't actually anything on the shop shelves yet, and that's where we need to get to. Yeah. But I think the buyers, the supermarkets, have to also recognise what they're asking for and financially reward that. And I think there needs to be education around consumers so they understand the impact of the things they're buying.
We had a question over here. A lady with a red jacket. Thank you. How am I doing?
Hi, my question was, we've had some talk of benefits in terms of reducing greenhouse gases. How is that being measured and monitored?
How are we measuring and monitoring?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. I might ask CH to jump in there if I need to. So actually, yesterday I was really excited to see that we had our first set of measurements taken on the polludiculture trials. Don't ask me how it works. I'm not a scientist. I just stand there looking rather bemused at the chambers and all the really cool equipment they use. But yeah, they've told me it's going to be monthly. We're having these measurements taken. They were looking at N2O, CO2, methane. Yeah. So yeah, monthly. Is there anything else? Yeah, we have the flux tower. That's been there for a while. That's with the miscanthus, looking at the emissions from that, from the crop, from the ground, and everything. The whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. We have so it might be similar work. What we have is like a greenhouse gas collar. It's like a dinner plate, I suppose. A smaller things, and you can do like monthly, sort of however often you want to measure the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's just, the greenhouse gases. So it's not just carbon; it's the other gases that you need to be looking at, and also the fluvial emissions as well. And one of our sites, we also dated the carbon that was coming off from the site. So we're kind of thinking about it could be almost a proxy for how well you're rehydrating the soil. So if the idea is that if you've still got older emissions coming off, it means it's still drying out, still oxidising low down the peat profile. Or if it's only newer emissions, that means the water table's at a better height. So that's one way of also looking at what's happening, which I think is really cool.
This gives me an opportunity to say I agree with everything that Sarah says now. And made some brilliant points, but I would go to say that we've got a few experts at measuring greenhouse gases in the room here. I can see one or two of them with measuring nitrous oxide, methane. The good thing about flux towers is that they stand out all the time, and sometimes we probably don't go out in the rain when it's warm, rainy, because it's rainy and warm. But actually, that's the real benefit. What happens to when soils are wet and it's raining on top of them? What's it's releasing? And it's not just from once you cover it and stop disturbing it. That's the greenhouse gas savings you're making. So the fact that you're not turning it over, you're not growing crops on it, but there's plenty of ways of measuring it and monitoring it.
That sounds great, like a flux capacitor from Back to the Future.
I know.
Sorry, do you want to?
I was going to say on I don't know if you guys want to talk about this. We've got those like crazy ones in Marley that open and close.
We unfortunately have to wrap up quite soon, but maybe I'll
go and talk to those guys over there.
Talk to the CH.
Oh yeah, go to the stall.
The stall, brilliant. Check that out. The stall at the CIEH, is it?
CH.
Yeah, CH. Sorry. That's really useful, and I'm sorry we haven't got any more time for questions. People are going to have to leave to get to the next session. And thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And as I said, last year's we also talked about polludiculture, other aspects. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to our panellists. A round of applause, please.